I frequently struggle with feeling left behind in life. Sometimes I feel like the patron saint of wasted potential. My family certainly thought that I'd be something special. That gifted student to burnt out lost adult pipeline is real. I spent my 20s trying to mold myself into a respectable adult. Going to school, dropping out, going back to school, trying on a dozen different careers, working at most of the stores at my local mall, and ultimately settling on being a starving artist, because I'm really only happy when I get to spend my days making weird little guys. Nothing else feels quite right. But being an independent artist can be a challenge, especially these days. It feels like I'm painting the walls of a house that's burning down. In order to cope, to keep myself going, when things feel particularly pointless, I find myself comparing to others who have started later in life, people who are older than I am when they made it. It's all about consoling myself with the idea that there's still time for me, rather than feeling hopelessly left behind in life. That there's no shame in plodding along at my own pace, and that there's an interesting destination, or at least some interesting landmarks up ahead, in my artist journey. Some of my favorite examples of some famous late bloomers include Alan Rickman, who didn't get his first film role until he was 42, J.R.R. Tolkien, who didn't publish The Hobbit until he was 45, and Colonel Sanders, who started KFC at 65. Really, the older someone is when they get their big break, the more reassured I feel. I suppose if I don't make it until I'm 80, I shouldn't be discouraged. But rather, I should be comforted by the idea that someone else somewhere out there could use my advanced stage to console themselves at not being successful yet. Teddy Roosevelt once said that comparison is the thief of joy, which is very true, but it's also human nature. I suppose it's best just to compare yourself to an earlier version of yourself. It is at the very least an unwelcome distraction from focusing on the work, which is really the only thing that matters. I think that the real ego trap is that comparison can often lead to judgment. When someone gets an opportunity or recognition, there is a tendency to analyze whether or not they may deserve it, which is a slippery slope to negativity and sort of the opposite of a gratitude practice. Whether through wealth or nepotism or through some other secret club, there will always be someone with an easier, more abundant path. But that can't stop us from our own unique journeys forward. It is certainly easy to get stuck in the mindset of resentment or longing, and I don't want to get bitter or cynical. It can be frustrating, though, to watch people my age now zip past me. I have to remind myself of the story of the tortoise and the hare. Slow and steady wins the race. My own little unhinged tip that I use is to create for yourself a nemesis. Not in a petty, violent way, but in the sense of manufacturing a healthy creative rivalry. Preferably a one-sided one. You've heard the cliche, fake it till you make it, and in applying that sentiment, you have only to look to other famous artists to see that many of them have had their own rivals that often push them into new creative heights. Da Vinci had Michelangelo, Van Gogh had Gauguin, Picasso had Matisse, Hitchcock had Truffaut. I have a nemesis, but of course they don't know that they're my nemesis because I'd like to retain a sliver of my mask of sanity, but it has really helped me combat resentment. If I can't help but compare, I might as well find a constructive and positive way to do so. I try to avoid making subjective judgments, but when I see my nemesis get rewarded for selling out their principles or receiving an opportunity that they didn't earn, it motivates me to keep working. Or more accurately, it inspires me to get back to work and off of social media. Nothing inspires me like spite. I can't pretend that I am any more wholesome and positive than I am. I hold no ill will to my nemesis, most of the time anyway. To be fair, they are just making the best of a broken system. These frustrating moments count more when I can use them to make me more honest with myself. Because what does making it even mean to me? I certainly don't want to make things just for money or head pats. I don't even want to make art under my real name anymore. If something happened and I got really famous, I think I would hate it. I just want to make art and eat snacks and go for little walks and not be homeless or struggling. And I want that for every artist out there. I suppose I'd make art for the raccoons in the dumpster if nobody else wanted to see it. The scariest thought I have is, did I miss my chance? But honestly, I don't believe you just get one shot at making it. There's just one shot at living your life. Of course, there are always a few obvious chances that are only obvious once you've fumbled them. But unless you quit, there will always be more to come along, as long as you're open and as long as you're working on something. Unless you've committed some kind of unforgivable act, there's always going to be an opportunity out there. And a lot of the time, you have to get creative with how you define success. Missing out is just like growing out a bad haircut. Something that will be erased by time if you can just manage to put the scissors down. I have a theory that the reason so many of us feel like late bloomers these days is that there are too many gatekeepers. There are so many doors that are closed to independent artists that by the time we figure out how the system works, we realize that there is no clear way in without compromising all that we are. If only it were as simple as making the art and getting noticed at the right time by the right people. It is almost a cliche at this point that artists face constant rejection, but I've noticed that most of that rejection happens before you even ask or apply for an opportunity. The art world, like the rest of the world, operates largely on a not what you know, but who you know basis. Publishers and curators and grant panels are looking more to illustrate their own essays and agendas, and if you're not game to play ball, good luck making anything happen. Art has always been inherently political, but now it's just insane. We are at the mercy of the guardians of the velvet rope, and opportunities became limited to you being of the same mind on every issue, and often which parts of yourself or your identity you can exploit at the current moment. But echo chambers make for bad art, and forget about anything enjoyable or accessible. Heaven forbid an artist has a unique point of view. And we're not all Andy Warhol. Most artists I know are terrible businessmen. If they weren't, they probably wouldn't have been called to be artists. Unless they just like the idea of being artists, not everyone can cope with the long haul of obscurity and rejection. Some artists realize that with an education, it's easier to get a job as a crew member than as a captain. Some are lucky enough to find a fulfilling career elsewhere, potentially even marginally related to art. But many people give up, and I mean that in the darkest sense. I've seen what it does to somebody to have a simple dream of making art, whether music, writing, or painting, and then just little by little be derided by people for their delusions, rejected for their lack of desirable identity or personality traits, force themselves into a cartoon version of what they think it means to be an artist, performing their humanity, and then just sinking into substance abuse or depression. It all boils down to the desire to be truly seen and understood, which is why I urge all artists to let go of any ideas of material success or even external praise and understanding, and just cherish the process, because that's where the healing magic lies. Don't forget that you were called to do this. Right now, I'm working on connecting to my inner child, who was wild and free and didn't care how she looked. Which is a key because as you become an adult, looking stupid or incompetent is a real fear. Which is a shame because it's hard to take real leaps and chances if you care what other people think too much. It can be absolutely paralyzing. I think as an artist, more so than explicit rejection, comes the necessity to be delusional. But it's the quote-unquote real artists, the institutional gatekeepers and degree holders who are delusional. They talk endlessly and say nothing, while making very little, and certainly not anything that moves us.
Allow me to destroy your gallery. Bullshit. Bullshit. Derivative. That I love. I absolutely love.
That's just the air conditioner.
I want it. It's everything. I mean, look at us. We're just air conditioners. I mean, after all, we're just walking around on the planet, breathing, conditioning the air.
Instead of feeling like a fraud or a failure, I'm learning to delight in the idea that someone might say, "Who does she think she is?" about my career, especially when I've made the decision, for my own peace and sanity, to try and stay in my own little lane. In the safety of the obscurity that is being a late bloomer, comes the gift of being able to reinvent yourself whenever you want without undue scrutiny. In order to find your voice, you have to try out a million other voices first. As a kid, especially as a teenager, I used to reinvent myself monthly. And in that practice, you take with you the bits you love and the bits that work until you are a complete person, a tapestry, which you never have to stop adding to as a record of your mortal days. I wonder if there's a link between late bloomers and chronic procrastination. Maybe it's not that we're struggling. Maybe we're just percolating or fermenting, and the timing isn't right. After all, to everything there is a season. Some plants just take longer to mature. For example, the corpse flower takes between 8 and 20 years to flower. And nobody chides an oak tree for taking years to mature. But once it does, you've got shade, a home for little critters, and endless acorns. It can be excruciating to put myself out there. Every time I tweet or share a Facebook status, I get a surge of adrenaline, thinking to myself how stupid and unnecessary my thoughts are. Who even cares? I'm just scared of looking stupid or crazy. There is a resistance that just feeds my brain reasons not to put myself out there. To live is to suffer, so the longer you live, the more material you gather to make meaningful art. It's all about transmutation. But there is no easy template or instructions on how to make that happen. Ernest Hemingway said, "There is nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at the typewriter and bleed." Obviously, it's not literal. Maybe it would look more like crying into a whiskey glass and typing between sobs. But in the meantime, while we all figure out how to transform pain into art, journaling has been profoundly helpful. Getting the thoughts and pain down on paper, without it needing to be in a tangible form, is a good first step. Regular brain dumps can stave off the madness for a while. In my garden, I have a beautiful patch of Queen Anne's lace. It's lightly fragrant, pretty, and the bees and butterflies love it. But before it flowers, it's just wild carrot, a patch of weeds to the untrained eye. Lovers of orderly lawns would surely just mow over it, or even rip it out. But patience pays off in the end. You can't really appreciate the beauty of an overgrown garden until it blooms, and it has to do so in its own time. There's no point in rushing it, or comparing it unfavorably to the flowers that bloomed in spring. I have to take the cue from my own wild, chaotic garden to just allow myself and my work to take the time it needs until it's time for it to be whatever it's going to be. With patience and persistence, I am sure I'll land butter side up somehow. I suppose as long as we're still breathing, there's still time for all of us. Good luck out there, and thank you so much for watching.